Y'all got quiet and hear myself now. I'm going to share tonight about the Harlot Church, and there's a reason for it, because there's been some occasions where questions come up with not clarity on it, and every few years I teach about this, so I'm going to go ahead and teach on it tonight, and to get a video and an audio made of it for future reference for anybody that might help in the future. So I know a lot of you already know a lot about what I'm going to share, but listen anyway, because you might learn something. So what I want to talk about is how the church, which is the bride of Christ originally, how she became a harlot. In the scriptures, you go all the way back to the Old Testament, early on, from that time early on, all the way back into Deuteronomy, and from there on, you can hear terminology used about the bride, or about the woman, or about she, or about her, and in connection with harlotry. See, God's people were supposed to be faithful to Him from the very beginning. He's always been their husband, in a sense, in the church, or the people of God have always been His bride, in a sense. And so, He's used that terminology all through the Scriptures. In fact, there's literally hundreds of Scriptures concerning the harlot, adulteresses, adultery, Babylon the harlot. There's enough Scripture on it that you could teach a 2 or 3 day seminar. In fact, back in the 80s, I actually did that on more than one occasion, teach very lengthy seminars on this. But tonight it's going to be a short version, and so I want to just make a few things clear. First of all, what a harlot is in the Scriptures is a woman who is unfaithful to her husband by committing adultery. And God's people, the church, the bride, is married to the Lord, and when they, the church, God's people, are unfaithful to the Lord, by practicing sin and by going after the things of the world, they, God's people, the church, becomes a harlot. In James chapter 4, verse 4, James said this. He said, "You adulteresses." So there's that terminology we're talking about right there in James. "You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you think that the Scripture speaks to no purpose? He jealously desires the Spirit which He has made to dwell in us." So God is a jealous God. There's more than one time He says He's jealous. So He's a jealous husband, so to speak. He's jealous for His wife to be faithful to Him and to love Him only and to love Him more than all else, to be reliable and trustworthy, and to be completely faithful. But the world, it says, "Do not love the world or the things of the world," in the book of 1 John, because all that's in the world is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. The world is selfish. The world is lazy. The world is passive and ungodly and sinful in every kind of way. And the world is unwilling to seek God in order to find Him. The world is unwilling to suffer. She is unwilling to overcome. The world is unwilling to overcome sin, and unwilling to crucify the flesh, and unwilling to give up its own worldly pleasures, and is unwilling to put God above all else. Now, when the church goes after the world, and the things of the world, and the ways of the world, the things I just described, she, His bride, His people, become an adulteress, a harlot. In Romans 15:4, Paul wrote this. He said, "For whatever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. You see, if you go back to the Old Testament, like I shared about the eternal gospel recently, all Scripture is inspired of God, and all the Scripture really reveals to us the heart of God, the will of God, and the purposes of God, especially the Old Testament. In fact, you cannot understand clearly what the New Testament is really talking about unless you understand the Old Testament, which is where it came from. And so whatever was written in earlier times, before the New Testament, was written for our instruction. 1 Corinthians 10:11 says, now these things happened to them, and it's referring again, you go read that in context, it's referring to the children of Israel, how when they were leaving Egypt and traveling to the promised land, how that they grumbled. Some of them grumbled and they were destroyed. Some of them, rebelled against God and they were destroyed. They did different things against God, even though He was trying to save them, but He ended up destroying them. And He goes on to say, it says then, after that, in that context, it says, now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, for the church. These things were written for our instruction. In the Old Testament, what happened to the children of Israel in the wilderness was written for our instruction. He says, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Isaiah 1:21 says this, how the faithful city has become a harlot. So now we're going back to what was written for our instruction. She who was full of justice, righteousness once lodged in her, but now murderers. That was God's people at one time. What happened is they fell away. What happened is they fell into sin. What happened is they began to duplicate the attitudes and the practices of the world around